Yeah, to answer your question about what language I'm learning, it is a secret for the time being. I'm doing a 3-month challenge, so it's like or a 90-day challenge. So by the end of 90 days, you go through this process, and you should be able to have a 15-minute conversation in a brand new language. And but it's done by a very well-known polyglot or speaker of many languages named Benny Lewis. And a lot of times people will they'll kind of like announce all over Facebook and to all their friends that they're doing this new thing, and they'll get like virtual pats on the back and like, oh, great job, and so then they get like this sense of accomplishment without actually having accomplished anything. And so I'm trying to avoid that, because I know that like a little too much praise really throws me off. Like I gotta keep my nose to the grindstone until there's enough momentum built up where it's like, I you're laughing, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Dude, I love you. Oh my gosh. Because I was gonna ask you, so what's the big secret? But that was perfect. That was awesome.
There will be a big reveal by about the end of July, because the idea is that you have to do some videos. So like I haven't done my 30-day video yet, which actually I should have done a couple weeks ago, but a 30, 60, and a 90-day video, basically to showcase how far you've come. So it's like for you as well as for other people who are thinking about doing the challenge. And then day 90, the video is supposed to be you having a 15-minute conversation only in this new language. So I will post that when the time comes, and then I will accept people's fawning and praise and adoration.
So how many languages currently? Like I know it's at least 2 that you speak.
Yeah.
How many? Just 2?
3. So I know Hebrew and Italian, and obviously I dabble in English, so I think that counts for something. But then I will be adding this 4th one.
You know Italian? I did not know that.
I do.
And if I did, I forgot.
Yeah, it's I started learning Italian back in like 2014, because I had an opportunity to go to Italy to assist at a SFG level 1 and then go through the level 2. And I had heard, and it was not just a rumor, turns out it's quite true, that Italians are generally not very good in English. And so I thought, well, you know what? Italian's a very pretty language, and all the languages I've studied up to this point have been like not so pretty. Like I think Hebrew is a very cool language, for example, but it's not renowned for like its beauty or musicality or anything like that. So I decided to start learning it, and then I kind of would go like back and forth with it a little bit. And when I moved back to the States, I hired an online tutor to help me with my Italian, so that I didn't end up losing it. And so I would say I'm pretty good at it right now.
That's awesome. That's
awesome. It's a very nice language. So if you guys ever do anything out in Italy and you need an interpreter, I'm sure there are going to be plenty there. But if you need an excuse to bring me out to Italy for some reason, just let me know.
I would like to bring you out with any kind of excuse. The last time I was in Italy, Fabio was the interpreter.
Yeah, you don't really need it, but I don't think I could do better than him. Like on his worst day, I think even on his worst day, I would get chumped. He's quite a good interpreter.
Yeah, that was an interesting experience for sure. And you're right, man. The Italian language, it just sounds so cool. Like
it's very pretty. I mean, there's something about it. It's like they didn't really plan for it to sound that good, because that's the thing with a language. Nobody ever really plans to make it sound very pretty. It just happens or it doesn't. Like I'm not going to point out any particular languages, but there are speakers of certain languages who know that their language isn't particularly beautiful or has kind of like a harsh sound to it. Well, here's a group of people who won't get offended, because I'm sure they're not listening. The Georgians. People not from like Atlanta, Georgia, obviously, but like from the country.
They have their own language too.
Oh, I know. You and I were there that one time. Remember we taught at gosh, I'm drawing a blank on her name.
Is that Delane's
place? Delane Ross's gym.
Delane, yeah.
Yeah. She spoke very good English. I mean, it was the other Georgians there. It was very hard to understand them. But yeah, my understanding is that the language of Georgia, the country, sounds like you're like shredding paper, is what I've heard people say. I mean, to me that sounds cool, but it also doesn't necessarily lend itself to like beautiful music and poetry and stuff.
I did not know that.
Again, this is purely third-hand information because I don't recall ever having even heard Georgian being spoken. That's just a reputation it has.
I have heard paper being shredded though, so if it's close, then
You might be conversational in Georgian then, without even knowing it. If you can do an impression of that, you're good.
I do impressions, but usually it's people.
Right, of course. So we'll find some Georgian people. Maybe someone will write in angrily about, how I've typified his or her language, and then we'll set the record straight.
As it turns out, through the listeners of the BodCast, I am unaware of any people from Georgia that in the United States or the actual country that listen to the BodCast. So
well, there's got to be a connection then, because if nobody in the state of Georgia or the country of Georgia is listening, it's just like the sound waves are bending around it, so nobody's listening yet. We're gonna fix that.
All right, that's cool. So, by the way, I would like to keep all of this as the intro to the podcast.
Let's do it. I'm in.
Good. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. We have our good friend, and I don't know, I would call you a recurring guest, but it's almost like I don't know, like this could be just the Aleks and Tim show sometimes that we could have.
Absolutely.
Regardless, our good friend Aleks, the Hebrew Hammer, is back with us today to talk about the power of dead bugs and other stuff like languages in Georgia. But,
that's right.
But Aleks, you just wrote an article for Original Strength talking about the power of dead bugs and how a lot of times people overlook them. Mm-hmm. Can you just go into that, like just a brief synopsis of your article, and then we'll dive right in?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of myself as a champion of the underdog, and so often in the world of movement and in exercise, certain moves will get elevated above others, and for good reason. Like I would say in the world of original strength, crawling naturally takes the high chair of like the thing everybody wants to do, everybody's like most excited about it, and is for good reason, of course, because it's got so many great properties to it. I mean, it really ties the body together. Like, you've seen it, I've seen it. People will begin to crawl on a regular basis, and it's like you and I know it's not like maybe a miracle in the conventional sense of the word, but it's almost miraculous how much better people will start to move and to feel and just to perform when they start doing a lot of crawling. And but things in excess can become their opposites if you're not cautious. And so one thing that I know you and I and Danny and all the other high-level instructors are very big on is the importance of doing the other resets as well. In fact, Sarah Young wrote a great article recently about breathing. I mean, that definitely gets overlooked a lot. I don't think I could have put it better than what she said. But even our foundation, like we talk a lot about crawling as being like the foundation for our movement, but even our foundation has a foundation, and it's all these other resets that come before it that set the stage for crawling. And so your crawling may be the foundation for things like improving your athletic performance, improving your general day-to-day movement, your coordination, and your strength. But in order to get to crawling, whether it's as an infant or as a full-grown adult getting reacquainted with your soft machine, you have to build up that foundation so that when you try to stack more things on top of it, it's not going to crumble. And dead bugs are a very important part of that because they represent what we would typically call a regression of crawling. And sometimes people get the wrong idea about regressions, meaning like, oh, well, that means it's not as valuable or it's more remedial. But realistically, what it means is that it's honing in on a particular angle of a movement that may not be as emphasized in the primary movement. And so by treating it as a primary movement and really spending a decent amount of time on, like, say, dead bugs, not only does it work wonders for improving your crawling, but it's going to strengthen the foundation such that you can build just on top of it for as much as you want, whether it's for strength, athletic performance, or just keeping up with your kids and grandkids.
Let's, since you mentioned it, talk about regressions and progressions a bit, because we often so we teach our workshops and in our books and stuff, we talk about regressions and progressions, and like you said, there's a way of thinking that, well, if it's a regression, it's easier, or I don't want to do a regression, I want to do the progression. I want to reach for the bigger thing.
Yeah.
But and the truth of the matter is a regression, in which a regression for you might not be a regression for me. It could be a progression.
Yeah.
Because we're all different. But really, typically, a regression is often harder than the thing you're trying to build up.
Oh, yeah.
For example, to me, dead bugs are way harder physically than crawling is.
Oh,
But
easily, yeah.
from a neurological standpoint, though, crawling is harder neurologically than dead bugs are.
Yeah.
So your regressions are often more physically demanding, but not as neurologically demanding. So I just wanted to put that out there to give people a bigger picture, because I think we often overlook that just because we're saying regression doesn't mean it's going to be easier.
Oh, yeah.
It may actually indeed be harder physically.
100%. And, I think that the way we typically use the terms progression and regression, I think it's fair to say that there are several reasonable uses of them. And so even though original strength is not like an algorithm, meaning you do this plus this, you're definitely going to get that.
Right.
It really comes down to testing. You just have to test everything and see how things work. And that's when you determine whether something is a progression or a regression for you versus whether it is a progression or a regression based on what you talked about, maybe the neurological difficulty or certain properties of the movement that would put it either earlier or later into, if you had to categorize it, let's say, chronologically in terms of how you would develop. So a good example of that would be breathing. I think this is the best example because this is the most straightforward. So, you in order to breathe in a way to reinvigorate your original strength, you need to get the diaphragm and the pelvic floor working together to stabilize the core, right? And so because a more advanced level of skill in that very basic foundational movement would be being able to do so with the diaphragm and the pelvic floor being pulled away from each other and having some resistance. Something like arms over your head and legs straight out we would view that as a regression because of that property of the movement, meaning it's just naturally pulling the rib cage and the pelvis further away from each other and creating more resistance between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor. Whereas if you were if you're on your back holding onto your knees, so your knees are closer to your chest, and you're just naturally bringing the diaphragm and the pelvic floor closer together so that they can work together better, or theoretically work together better, we would consider that a regression. But if, let's say, you just do a lot of core work and your abs are always tight, and being in that position tightens up your abs so that you're always you're almost like breathing behind the shield, as we would say in Strong First, meaning breathing behind tensed abs. So your breathing is shallow. You're not able to get everything engaged from the pelvic floor and then sequentially up into the chest. Then that actually might be something you'd have to work toward. So for you, that would be a progression, even though the characteristics of that position itself are, technically speaking, theoretically easier. But one of the things I noticed for me, for example, I do a lot of midsection work. And so even now, I find that if I have my hands over my head and my legs straight out in front of me, I actually breathe better. And it's like my breathing progression, right? Likewise, if I'm crocodile breathing is kind of 50-50. Sometimes it seems to work really well. Sometimes I might have to kind of work my way into it. But the exact same thing goes for a lot of other movements too. I've worked with people actually for whom dead bugs are not a good match, because again, I think they spend a lot of time maybe either with having done a lot of core work, or they're just hunched over more often, or maybe they're more anterior chain dominant to begin with. Anterior chain just meaning the muscles that you would see if you look in a full-length mirror. But if they did leopard crawls, then they improved in leaps and bounds. So a progression for them actually would be working toward the dead bugs, as opposed to, and a regression was leopard crawl. And so, on the scale of where the movement would appear to fall, like if you were to just put it chronologically in terms of like, here's how you add a new layer of skill, right? If that's the only way that you look at it, and you're thinking, oh, well, if I do a regression, that's kind of admitting that I'm not good enough, and and whatever, it really messes with people's minds. And that's why having the right idea about what it means for a progression or regression, it's totally a personal thing. It really depends on the individual.
So what you said just there is the reason that I don't know if you've noticed this, but I hardly ever use the word or phrase baby crawling anymore, because as soon as I do, people shut down, because that is not, I don't want to crawl like a baby. That's not sexy. So I always refer to it now as hand and knee crawl to take out the mental block or barrier out of it.
That's smart, actually. I have noticed that, and I knew that had to be the reason why, because I know, like, if you call it, like, people, you say baby crawl, what they hear is little sissy weakling crawl, and you're like, that's not the case at all. It's like, doesn't work like that,
Yeah, in like 0.1 of a second, they've made this mental impression and decision that, no, that's not what I want to do.
You know what you got to call? You got to call it the man crawl, and then people are going to be like, I want to do the man crawl. I don't want to do some leopard crawl. I'm a man. I'm not a cat. That would be like kind of like reverse psychology.
You know what? That's probably crazy enough to work. I'm sure there's something to that.
We'll test it out. We'll see if that works.
All right, so in your article, and you kind of just touched on this a little bit, talking about the regressions, but you said your number one point in the article was that there are a lot of people that crawl a lot, but they're not good crawlers. Mm-hmm. And is that because they're missing that foundational pieces that you're talking about?
I definitely think so, because if you think about, and there may be, differences from person to person, but if you think about it, like, again, crawling is supposed to be the culmination of deep breathing, your head control, rolling and rocking, and then you start to get toward this foundational kind of like gait movement. That, of course, being crawling. And a lot of people just kind of want to skip to the end. And if you think about it, really the whole purpose of original strength is to build up your reflexive stability, so you can move smoothly and athletically and with confidence and competence. And doing that with crawling, it's a much more it's like a higher order movement, we might say, at least in terms of like the pecking order for the other resets. And so if you don't have very good reflexive stability and you're trying to crawl, you're going to more than likely rely on feed forward tension, which is good. I mean, feed forward tension but it's contextually good. Like, it's good for kettlebell and body weight, like traditional kettlebell and body weight exercises. It's great for barbell stuff, obviously. But when you're trying to improve the way that your body just naturally responds and reacts to movement as it's happening and before it happens, just constantly being tense is going to really diminish the amount of gains, we might say, that you'll get from the crawling. And so it isn't uncommon to see people who crawl a lot, but they look really tense, like there's something like sneaking up on them, and they're just trying to get out of the way, as quickly as they can. Like, if you're going to use an animal kingdom type of visualization. So
you're saying feed forward tension is not desired nor optimal when you're just trying to naturally move.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it, like, well, actually, here's another great example. And I don't want to call anybody out in particular, but I've seen this happen in a number of locations that I've been to, where people will be teaching the crawl, and I'm looking on and watching. And these are people who are like, they're familiar with original strength. I don't think they've gone in the case I'm thinking of right now. I don't know whether or not they had gone through the workshop or the certification, but they were familiar with the basics of the system. And the way they were teaching the crawl was not with feed forward tension, for sure, but in kind of like a robotic way. Like, they'll step, pause, step, pause, step, pause. And it's not wrong. You're not breaking any of the three major pillars of original strength by doing that. But think about if you walked that way. I mean, if crawling is supposed to be the basis for your gait, and you're like walking like RoboCop, it'll look cool if it's a Halloween costume that you're wearing, this RoboCop thing. But it doesn't really pardon me, it doesn't really have much application to the real world.
So it's not wrong. It's just not natural.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's not wrong. It's not going to hurt them. It's not gonna hamper their ability to improve, but it is going to slow it down. I mean, it's like driving in second gear. I mean, you're on the open road.
And I want to ask you this just to get your take on it. For some people, do you think that they crawl with feet forward tension because they can't separate the difference between exercise and movement? Is that possible?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think I might have first heard this from you actually many moons ago, that a lot of people, they really, I mean, I think it was you who said something to the effect of like, exercise is really like a movement supplement, right? Like if we take supplements like protein shakes and vitamins, and there's nothing wrong with them, but if we're taking them because we're trying to make up for like a poor diet, well, and then the supplements aren't really supplementing anything. All they are, it's like a Band-Aid on like a broken leg. And the same thing goes with movement, is that I remember there's a very famous Israeli movement expert named Ido Portal, and he pointed out, even Mike Tyson, who's like a specialist in boxing, like the greatest who ever lived, even he has to squat down to pick up his kid, meaning even he has to be able to engage in very basic foundational movements to do day-to-day things like picking up your child and playing with him or her. And the less familiar you are with just the basic natural movements outside of the context of maybe the four walls of your gym or your courage corner, then the harder it's going to be for you to apply this stuff in the real world, because you're only used to movement and deliberate movement in the context of very regimented program. So I've definitely seen people, when I've first tried to teach them to crawl, they'll just get as tight as they can and then start to crawl, and it really takes some coaching to get them to kind of relax and visualize moving without any excess effort.
How do you've written that dead bugs actually help people learn how to move fluidly and get rid of that excess robotic movement or tension? How do you think that happens?
I'm not 100% sure, but I have a theory, and I have a couple of theories. I have theories about everything, Tim. This is just what I do. But if you think about crawling, well, let's think about it like this, actually. So a lot of times people who come to Original Strength, they really range from, people like Dan John, who has been like just an amazing, and it would not be a podcast episode with you and me if I wasn't mentioning Dan John in some capacity. This.
We're batting 1,000. We're doing
exactly.
Good.
Yeah, exactly. We're hitting we're check marking every box we need. But he had been like a high level athlete and coach for decades, and he still gets tons of stuff out of Original Strength. So he's not somebody who is like a raw beginner. You know what I mean? Like he was training even when you were probably just barely born. He's just been doing it for so long. But then you also get people who maybe have been sedentary for the majority of their lives, or for the last maybe 10 plus years, and they're finding that they can't just go to like a group fitness class and then walk out feeling better. They end up feeling like they're beaten up. And so because they just don't have the requisite strength, they don't have the requisite coordination. And so I kind of think that one of the reasons why dead bugs can be so helpful for people is because it's kind of like amplifying one of the benefits of crawling, which is without question a stronger midsection. Like people crawl a lot and they're always amazed at like how much stronger their abs feel, in addition to improved posture and improved strength. But if you think about it, if you're jumping and let's say you want to skip the hands and knees crawl because you once heard me call it the baby crawl or something like that, and now it's not cool anymore, and you want to go for like the leopard crawl, but you don't have the requisite strength in your legs or in your arms, well, now all of a sudden you're loading them up. And you're also loading up, your chest, your lats, your core, your thighs, like everything. And so suddenly, you don't really have much experience with doing that sort of a thing. And so your body might just end up overreacting and doesn't really know how to keep the limbs relaxed, because it's either never done this kind of a thing before, never done any strength training before, or it's just this is what you're used to. Kind of going back to that, people who don't know who divorce movement from exercise are common. Or it's common for them to have this issue. Whereas, and because you're loading up your hands and your feet and all the mechanoreceptors, or these little receptors, I guess we could call it. I wish I could think of a different name for them, like signals or sensors or something like that.
Neuromuscular sensors, maybe.
Exactly. They basically send all these signals to all the muscles in your limbs, as well as like your chest, your lats, your core, all these other things, to just give you the extra boost you're going to need when you're crawling. So you're loading up the mechanoreceptors. They're telling your arms and legs, okay, you need to fire up in this sequence and this way and whatever. But if your only familiarity with doing that is with high tension feed forward type of stuff, it's hard to break yourself of that habit. So all that to say, with the dead bug, it's great because your limbs are unloaded, and so you can really just focus on, for example, getting your core working the way that it's supposed to, while learning how to keep your limbs relaxed, so that you can later apply that to your crawling, so that you're not doing this like robotic sort of like crawl, as it were, but you're really flowing across the ground. Like you're kind of teaching your body how to keep the limbs relaxed in something where all of them have to be working in unison and in concert at the same time.
I like your theory. I can resonate with that. That makes good sense to me.
Good.
So
I'm on the right track then.
Yeah, I like your theory. Next question is, you mentioned something in the article how that traditional core exercises don't make your core stronger, or traditional exercises don't make your core stronger.
I would say they don't make your core strong.
Strong.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Stronger, yes. But I have known lots of people who, they could do like traditional core exercises. And I'm not talking either about like, sit-ups or crunches, even though those would be traditional, but like more high level stuff like L-sits, hanging leg raises and things like that.
You jumped to level 3 then.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's level 1 and level 3. Level 2 is a myth. There's nothing there, and all it is just high rep variations of like the dead bugs and what have you. That's how you get to level 2. Or we could talk about some of the weighted modifications for dead bugs. Actually, that would be a great level 2 between, just the standard issue stuff and then the crazy stuff before you get to the traditional ab exercises like L-sits and leg raises and what have you. But in order for your core to be strong, it has to be stable. And so it's similar to, let's take your pecs, for example. They may be strong like in a bench press or in dips and things like that, but if they're constantly tight, they're going to prevent you from really expressing your body the way that it's supposed to. And with the core, we have not just what we might call the beach muscles, like your six pack, your obliques and stuff like that. Cool stuff you can show off at the beach, but you've also got the transverse abdominis, the spinal segmental stabilizers, of course the diaphragm and the pelvic floor, and theoretically some of these you should be able to train within the confines of a traditional movement, and maybe you can, but if you can't do it at a lower level, to me, it seems unlikely that you're going to do it at a higher level, right? It's like there's a joke in the world of powerlifting, like I can't even squat below parallel unless I have 315 on my back, like, yeah, okay, you can squat.
That's only funny because it's true.
Exactly, yeah, and we know people like that, or who were like that and maybe have reformed themselves, but that's the thing is, if you can say, well, yeah, I mean, I can definitely squat below parallel, but there's a tremendous caveat to it. It's like, do you really own it? Or are you being forced into it by weight that exceeds your body weight? That's what it takes to get you down that low. That's an issue. And now when it comes to, so that would be an example of, not really necessarily owning the movement, even if you can do it, right? And with the core, so much of what we do with the core is stuff that's done, to stabilize you as you're walking and as you're running or engaging in day-to-day activities. But if you're not used to doing that, the musculature necessary to do all those things it's going to be on a perpetual smoke break, as it were. So it's not like you're going to just all of a sudden, pick a super hard exercise and it's going to be like, all right, time to get back to work. odds are something else is going to pick up the slack, and that's going to keep being lazy. So working on stuff like, I mean, segmental rolling is great for that. The dead bugs that we're discussing are obviously a great example of that. And so by doing that and getting the core stabilizer muscles fired up, you will end up having enough stability that you can likely start to squat below parallel without 315 on your back, or you'll be able to engage in other basic movements that your body is heir to right off the bat. But without that, I think that even cool stuff that I really like hanging leg raises and dragon flags and L-sits and other crazy stuff like that, it becomes easier to do it, and you're not working around like a major deficit. And it does have real applications to the real world. I have an online student in Australia, Frances Moylan, and a number of years ago she did a program that I wrote that had as part of it dead bugs between every set of front squats. And she's a pretty petite gal. I don't think she'd mind my mentioning her weight. I mean, she must be like 123 pounds, or maybe I think around 54 kilos for people who know kilos. And at the end of the program, she was able to do 5 sets of 5 front squats with 2 24-kilo kettlebells, or 2 53-pound kettlebells, which amounted to about 85% of her body weight. Now, 85% of your body weight with a front squat is respectable as it is with a barbell, but with kettlebells, where like the stability levels are much, much lower, and you have to really work on keeping those bells close. I mean, that's phenomenal. And the big thing was just adding the dead bugs in between her regular sets of front squats.
If you're listening to this and you cannot relate, let me just tell you that if anybody does double kettlebell front squats with 2 24-kilogram bells, no matter who you are, you feel it. I mean, that takes strength. But for a 123-pound or 124-pound person to do that, that's just super strong.
And for 5 sets of 5 reps too.
I mean, that is
one thing
no
to do
joke.
it for like 1 or 2. Yeah.
That's very impressive. Which kind of segues into to me it was your strongest point about dead bugs is that it helps you learn how to breathe behind the shield.
Mm-hmm.
What is, because that kind of to me also equates with the stability you were talking about.
Totally.
Can you explain what breathing behind the shield is?
Yeah. So I mentioned it. I alluded to it a little bit earlier as being this idea of breathing behind braced abs. And so if you're lifting weights or you're doing body weight exercises or anything of that nature, you need the core to be stable, because that's what's going to help you to, I'm not an expert in the terminology with all this stuff, so I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. But if you want to transfer forces from your legs to your upper body, you need to have a stable core to do it. And that stable core means not just, a 6-pack braced for a punch or what have you, but also that the musculature that's kind of working behind the scenes, the stuff you can't show off at the beach, like your diaphragm and pelvic floor and the multifidus and all these other cool things. Then what you have to be able to do is you have to be able to breathe behind these stabilized abs. And a lot of times, number one, this is not going to be the same thing as breathing when you're really relaxed, where you can take really long, deep breaths. It's going to be something that's going to take a little bit more focus, but should still be able to be done within the confines of what we do in original strength. And so what the dead bug does is it makes it so that you can feel what that should feel like automatically, meaning you get a little bit of a preview of that with crocodile breathing, not to the same degree, but there's a level of resistance on the stomach. So crocodile breathing is you're laying on the floor, and the floor is providing some resistance to your stomach, so that your breathing is a little bit more. It has to work against this external resistance. It's not, like if you're laying on your back and your stomach is unencumbered. So you kind of get a taste for it like that, but it still allows you to breathe very deep. So the next level beyond that would be still breathing with that resistance, but having the resistance come simply from the body, your body position. So rather than coming from the floor and the tactile feedback that you're getting from it, they're actually coming from the position that you've put your body in. And so if you're in a dead bug position, One of the things you want to do is try to get your tailbone a little bit off the floor, because that is, and then bringing your knees a little closer to your chest. I usually tell people at or beyond the belt line, and automatically that will fire up your abs reflexively, like it just does what it's supposed to do.
That's the magic word.
It is, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what it is. And even people who don't quite know how that should feel will feel that, because they don't have to think to get to that feeling. The body tells them this is what's supposed to happen now that you're in this position, right? And it's a very good, stable, and safe position for your abs. And so being able to learn what that feels like and then transfer that to your iron practice, like, with kettlebells or barbells or, body weight training, makes all the difference in the world. And it also makes sure that you're not holding your breath and then getting dizzy and, potentially collapsing. I mean, you see this happen periodically. People will just forget to breathe while they're training. And there is a time and a place, to hold your breath if you're a bit more advanced and you know what you're doing. But most trainees shouldn't really be holding their breath. They should be learning how to breathe behind the shield until they get to the point where the breath control is such that they can justify not breathing in a very, very heavy effort.
Yeah, so I think that's the golden key to dead bugs, is that they do teach reflexive tension.
Yeah.
Which and because it's reflexive, and like you just said, you should be breathing behind that. So now you're learning two things. Your body's learning how to reflexively activate the anterior chain, but two, you're also learning how to breathe with that pressure.
Exactly.
And you can get those reps in, and you could take that into the skill of weight training and become even stronger, by far a great deal stronger, really.
Absolutely. And there's another nice side effect to that, is that, when you don't have good core stability, you're also it's going to hamper your mobility in other ways too. So it is so common for me to see people who they work on their core stability, and suddenly they're squatting deeper, their squats feel easier. And I mean body weight squats too. Like, that's, I think, the real test, because if you can squat down low with a whole bunch of weight, well, the weight is kind of providing a little bit of that ability. But if you can do it with no weight, it's a great sign of your general stability and the mobility that comes along with it. But likewise with the toe touch, for example, I've seen a lot of people, they can sit on the ground and touch their toes, but if they stand up, they can't. Well, that's a surefire sign that it's an issue of stability and not mobility. Because if you can do it in one context where you're very stable, like sitting on the floor, but not another context where you're standing and you have a lower surface area that's supporting you, well, then, your stability is definitely the issue. And so, and this is a way to do it that it's not, I would actually say it's less sophisticated than just like the bracing cues that we often get. And they're good cues. I'm not saying, they're not useful, but I would say the dead bug approach is even less sophisticated, because it goes back to what your body's natural reaction is to this stuff, and it takes advantage of that. So you don't have to think your way through anything. You can learn how it feels and then replicate it, which is, in my opinion, is ideal. Like, at some level, you do need like verbal cues and things like that. But if you can get somebody's body into the position that it needs to be in order to get them to feel the thing that is going to fill in a gap in their abilities and help them to do what they want, I mean, there's nothing better than that, because feeling something is much more potent than just kind of understanding how something should theoretically work. Right? It's like now at this point you have experience with it, and dead bugs are phenomenal for that, even if it's just a starting position.
I think another thing to go along with what you said is, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but if I could take the word stability and give it a really simple synonym, I would say it could be safety.
Yeah.
So if your body is able to stabilize and your nervous system knows that it has that stability, it feels safe, and it's going to allow you to express yourself in full range of motion, full strength, and full power.
Exactly.
Whereas if you lack that stability, it's going to put brakes on you. It's going to put governors on you to try to keep you from getting hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect way to describe it, because, I mean, when we think of stability, whether it's physical or like, conceptual, right? Like, people think like financial stability, or what they really mean is like financial safety. Right? It's not exactly. It's not that their checkbook is balanced, quote unquote. It's that, I mean, maybe that's a part of it, but but it has everything to do with their safety, and it's the exact same thing. And a lot of times I like stretching. I think it has a lot of good applications. But if you think about why certain muscles get tight more than others, like we know that as we age, we have certain muscles that get tighter and other muscles that get longer and looser. So we got the tonic and the phasic muscles. This is something that Czech physiologist Vladimir Janda talked a lot about, long time ago. And so you see certain muscles like the pecs, the biceps, the hip flexors. They're going to get tighter as we get older. And surprise, surprise, the muscles on the opposite side tend to get longer and looser. So, for example, the glutes get, gluteal amnesia, as we like to call it. Upper back tends to round, when the pecs get really tight. And a lot of this it's a natural phenomenon, but it can be reversed just by moving the way that you're made to move. Like, it gets worse when you're sitting all the time, and that's just by nature. So then if you think about the mechanism behind why certain muscles will get tight due to a lack of movement and a lack of a need to stabilize. Like, when you're seated, you're stabilized as much as you need to. So your body's not going to throw extra resources to stabilize when something else is doing its job for it. But it gets used to doing that. And so your body feels like this is safe. Maybe it doesn't feel great. Maybe I kind of feel crappy, but this is safe. And I know for sure that it's safe. And until you give it options for performing differently, it's going to keep doing that. So like endless stretching without first adding back the stability component is just like, it's like changing the oil on the Titanic. It's just not the problem you need to be dealing with.
What's off the cuff, a very simple way somebody could implement dead bugs into their lifestyle to have performance gains or strength gains in the gym, or to just feel better? Because really it's going to do all of those things, I would think.
I think, a good approach would be in the morning. I always feel like, doing something first thing in the morning is really what's going to set you up for a great rest of the day. And so I'm a big believer in that. If you just set a timer for like 1 minute and you do as many quality dead bugs in that minute as you can, it doesn't mean race. In fact, if anything, you should do them slowly and methodically. But you just try to do as many as you can within that 1 minute period, and then go about your morning. If you do that every day, let's say you get in like 20 in the course of that minute, and then let's say you do that every day. It's 7 days a week, right? So by the end of the week, you've done 140 total dead bugs. And then as the weeks and months go on, you're accumulating more and more.
7,300.
That's, I see you got your calculator ready, or you're very good at even better. Wow, I'm impressed.
7,300 dead bugs in a year if you did that.
You hear that, folks? That is a lot of dead bugs. You can doing 7,300 something dead bugs in a year, like that's going to have an impact. It's just going to. Imagine if you would apply that to something, to anything else, 7,300 of anything in a year, that's a lot, right? If you were to put like $1 in a jar, well, I guess you'd have to put in a lot more in order to get to the 7,300. It'd have to be like at least 20 per day.
$20.
Yeah, exactly. You'd get that same thing. And so $20 is not a whole lot, for one day, but over the course of a year, it's a big boatload of money. And it's exactly the same with movement. Like little bit done daily will have a tremendous effect. So yeah, I think 1 minute of that, you'd be hard pressed not to see some pretty amazing results in short order, and pretty eye-popping results in about a year's time.
That seems just so simple, Alex. So simple.
It's almost like it's so simple it could work. Almost.
There's only one way to find out.
That's right. Folks, get after it. 20 minutes. You owe us 20 dead bugs a day.
You could. But like Alex said, you could also test this against your body to see how it responds. You could do your 1 minute of dead bugs and then try to do something that was maybe difficult for you right before you did that, and just see how you feel.
Absolutely.
Or you could test your performance in the gym, like, after 1 minute of dead bugs, after a couple of weeks, few weeks, and just see if your lifts are improving.
Absolutely. And I not only do I think you find that your lifts are improving, I think you're going to find a lot of other stuff is going to improve as well, like your general movability, as I like to call it. Your low back's probably going to feel pretty great. Your coordination's going to go way up because we know that cross-lateral movements really improve the communication between the two hemispheres of the brain, which has a tremendous impact on how you move in general. And one thing I wanted to mention earlier too, that because you mentioned that you find dead bugs to be more difficult than crawling. I have crawled 10 minutes in a row on multiple occasions. I've crawled dragging over 100 pounds, for 10 minutes, again, intervals, not necessarily all at once. But I have never been able to get past 120 dead bugs in a row, which is about 3.5 minutes worth of dead bugs. So you think about that, like 3.5 minutes worth of dead bugs really just takes it out of me, right? But I could crawl for 10 minutes if I really want to. And I've done it multiple times. So if you think that dead bugs are too remedial, and you got both Tim and me talking about our struggles with the bug, then just give it a try. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how much of an impact it has.
Yeah, they're no joke, but they do pack a big punch for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Aleks, thank you so much, man. This was really a lot of fun. I've learned a lot about language.
Great.
The great country of Georgia.
Absolutely, which we know paltry little about, other than that it evidently has a funny language.
But I've learned more than I knew before we started.
True.
And got to have a great conversation with you about dead bugs, which, and to be honest too, like this may happen to you as well. I know the value of all the smaller stuff, but it's easy to let a lot of that smaller stuff slip away when you start looking at other things and moving along.
Absolutely. And it's very easy to forget too that even if we see the value in it, because I do dead bugs almost daily, like I do them like in between sets of squats, for example, and it just, works wonders. And then I just kind of assume, well, other people know that dead bugs are great because I've told them that they're great, but people need to experience it to really understand why they're so awesome. And it's like I was having a conversation last week with somebody who, and I just mentioned, the resting squat is like the natural human resting position, and hanging is really good for your shoulders because our shoulders are that's one of the things they're made to do. And he's a guy who works out, he trains at the same gym that I do, and it just like blew his mind. He's like, that makes so much sense. I'd never thought about that. And so it's like you forget, that the little things that you take as like axiomatic are like mind blowing to some people. And just because, and it was the same for us at one point, like there was some point where I was like, I can crawl every day and then like just blow my squat and pressing strength out of the water. Like that seems crazy. And then I did it. I'm like, well, duh, that makes perfect sense because, I experienced it and so on and so forth. And dead bugs are no different.
So guys, if you want to test the pudding and see the proof in the pudding, the lesson for the day is get on the floor for at least a minute and do dead bugs every day. And just notice what you discover.
Reap the rewards.
Aleks, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time on the OS BodCast.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Original Strength BodCast.